You did everything right. You went to college, got a degree, landed a decent job. You work hard, maybe even work overtime. You budget carefully, skip the daily lattes, cook at home. Yet somehow, you're still treading water. Your parents bought a house at your age. You're wondering if you'll ever afford one. They raised 3 kids on one income. You and your partner together can barely cover rent. Here's what they don't want you to know. It's not your fault. This isn't about avocado toast or poor financial decisions. The middle class isn't disappearing because individuals are failing. It's being systematically dismantled by structural forces that have fundamentally reshaped the American economy. While you've been told to work harder, hustle smarter, and get more credentials, the rules of the game have been rewritten beneath your feet. This is the story of a silent collapse, and why no amount of personal effort can fix a problem that was never personal to begin with. Point 1. The housing trap, when wages stopped mattering. Let's start with the most visible symptom of middle-class collapse. You cannot afford a place to live. In 2024, the statistics are jaw-dropping. Out of 284 tracked occupations, everything from teachers to technicians, nurses to accountants, only 11 could still afford to purchase a home with a 10% down payment. Read that again. 11. Out of 284 professions. That means police officers, electricians, even mid-level managers are being priced out of homeownership entirely. The rental market? Just as brutal. Only 94 occupations could afford a 1-bedroom rental, and 64 could afford a 2-bedroom, requiring annual incomes between $62,480 and $74,040 to achieve basic affordability. Think about what this means. Registered nurses, skilled tradespeople, and college-educated professionals working full-time jobs can't afford basic housing in the communities where they work. Here's the structural trap. While median wages have grown 73% since 1968 when adjusted for inflation, housing costs have exploded far beyond that rate. In many markets, home prices have increased 300 to 400% faster than wage growth. The promise that hard work leads to home ownership, the cornerstone of middle-class identity, has been shattered not by individual choices, but by systemic failure. And it gets worse. As of 2023, 31.3% of American households were cost-burdened, meaning they spent more than 30% of their income on housing. For renters, that number skyrockets to 49.7%, nearly half of all renting households. When half your income vanishes into rent before you buy groceries, save for emergencies, or invest in your future, you're not building wealth, you're surviving. This isn't a personal finance problem, this is structural extraction. Point 2. The wage stagnation illusion. Growing poverty with a paycheck. Now let's talk about the great American con job. You're working harder than ever and earning less than ever, even when your paycheck says otherwise. Wage stagnation isn't just about numbers staying flat. It's about the fundamental disconnection between productivity and compensation. American workers are producing more value per hour than at any point in history. Productivity has skyrocketed. Yet median real wages have barely budged for decades. The wealth workers create is being generated. It's just not going to workers anymore. Here's the reality. While the median US household income is around $85,157 as of 2025, that middle-class range of $50,000 to $150,000 means dramatically different things depending on where you live and what year we're talking about. In high-cost areas, $85,000 doesn't buy middle-class security anymore. It buys anxiety. It buys the constant mental calculation of, can I afford this? It buys one medical emergency or car breakdown away from financial catastrophe. The cost of living crisis isn't primarily a price problem. It's a wage problem. Essential services, healthcare, childcare, education, housing, have increased at rates that make general inflation look tame. Healthcare costs alone have become a second mortgage for many families. Childcare in many states costs more than college tuition. These aren't luxuries. These are the basic infrastructure of middle-class life, and they've been priced beyond what wages can sustain. Meanwhile, compensation structures have fundamentally changed. Benefits that were once standard, pensions, comprehensive health insurance, paid time off, have been steadily eroded. The gig economy and contract work shift economic risk from employers to workers, who now bear the costs of their own equipment, training, healthcare, and retirement while being paid per task rather than receiving stable salaries. You're not failing to budget correctly. The budget itself has become mathematically impossible for millions of working Americans. Point 3. The automation and inequality engine. The future doesn't need you. Here's where the story gets darker, because this isn't just about the present, it's about a future that's actively being constructed without middle-class participation. Automation and artificial intelligence aren't just changing jobs, they're restructuring class itself. The benefits of technological advancement, which should, in theory, improve everyone's lives, are concentrating wealth at the top while destabilizing middle-income work at an unprecedented pace. The data is stark. Automation increases income inequality by raising returns to capital while leading to stagnant wages and wealth concentration. Translation? The robots and algorithms make money for people who own robots and algorithms, not for people who work alongside them. As technology eliminates or de-skills middle-class jobs, everything from manufacturing to office work to customer service, the new jobs being created are bifurcating into two categories: high-skill, high-pay jobs requiring advanced education, and low-skill, low-pay service jobs with no advancement trajectory. The middle is being hollowed out. And this is structural by design. When companies automate, profits increase but payroll decreases. Those productivity gains become shareholder value, not worker wages. Between 2019 and 2022, the wealthiest family's wealth was 71 times greater than middle-class family's wealth. This isn't happening because wealthy people work 71 times harder. It's happening because the economic system rewards capital ownership at unprecedented rates while devaluing labor. The gig economy accelerates this trend. Platform work strips away labor protections, benefits, and stable income, while creating algorithmic management systems that maximize profit extraction from workers. Uber, DoorDash, freelance platforms, these aren't creating middle-class jobs. They're creating precarious work with no safety net, where workers compete globally for ever smaller shares of value they create. Here's the terrifying truth. This isn't a temporary transition phase. This is the new economic structure, and it doesn't require a thriving middle class to function. Point 4. The myth of meritocracy. Why working harder won't save you. This brings us to the most insidious part of the middle class collapse, the myth that individual effort can overcome structural barriers. American culture is saturated with the message that success is a personal responsibility. Can't afford rent? Get a side hustle. Struggling with student loans? Should have chosen a different major. Can't buy a house? You must be spending irresponsibly. This narrative serves a purpose. It keeps people blaming themselves instead of examining the system. But the mathematics don't lie. When 273 out of 284 occupations cannot afford homeownership with standard down payments, that's not a personal failure epidemic. That's a system that no longer produces middle-class outcomes for middle-class work. When the share of adults in middle-class households drops from 61% in 1971 to 50% in 2021, that's not because half the country suddenly became lazy. That's structural economic transformation. The credential trap illustrates this perfectly. For decades, the answer to wage stagnation was get more education. So people did. They took on crushing student debt to earn degrees that would supposedly guarantee middle-class security. But as college degrees became more common, their market value declined. Now you need a bachelor's degree to qualify for jobs that once required a high school diploma, and you need a master's degree for positions that once needed a bachelor's. The goalposts keep moving, the debt keeps accumulating, and middle-class security remains elusive. This isn't about not working hard enough. Middle-class Americans are working harder than ever, longer hours, multiple jobs, constant connectivity. They're doing everything the system tells them to do. And it's still not enough, because the system isn't designed to deliver middle-class outcomes anymore. The wealth gap isn't about personal virtue. It's about structural advantage compounding over time. When the middle class was strong, from roughly the 1940s through the 1970s, that wasn't because of superior individual effort. It was because of strong unions, progressive taxation, robust social safety nets, regulated capitalism, and political will to distribute economic gains broadly. When those structures were dismantled, the middle class began its collapse. No amount of individual hustle can rebuild structural protections that were deliberately destroyed. Point 5. The invisible crisis. Why we call it silent. So why don't we talk about this more? Why isn't middle-class collapse dominating every political conversation, every policy debate, every national priority? Because the collapse is silent by design. Unlike dramatic economic crashes, stock market collapses, bank failures, sudden unemployment spikes, middle-class erosion happens gradually. It's the slow accumulation of just a little harder and just a little more expensive until one day you realize the American dream has been priced out of reach. It's quiet desperation dressed up as personal inadequacy. The silence is maintained through carefully crafted narratives. Politicians across the spectrum claim to champion the middle class, while policies benefit the wealthy. Financial media celebrates stock market highs while ignoring that most Americans own little to no stock. Economic statistics tout GDP growth and low unemployment, while median quality of life declines. There's also the silence of shame. When the cultural message is that success is individually earned, failure feels individually deserved. People don't want to admit they're struggling because struggling means you've done something wrong. So millions of people suffer quietly, each believing they're uniquely failing rather than recognizing they're collectively experiencing structural violence. The data tells us the middle class is shrinking, but some economists spin this as good news. People are moving up. But the reality is more nuanced and darker. Yes, some people have joined upper income brackets, but many more have fallen into lower income categories. And those who remain in the statistical middle are experiencing declining security, increasing debt, and vanishing prospects for their children. The collapse is silent because acknowledging it out loud would require acknowledging that the system isn't working, and that would demand fundamental change. Seeing structural reality. Here's what you need to understand. If you're struggling, you're not broken. The system is. The middle-class collapse isn't happening because of individual moral failures, poor choices, or lack of effort. It's the predictable result of deliberate policy choices, weakening labor protections, deregulating corporations, concentrating wealth, prioritizing shareholder value over worker well-being, and allowing basic necessities to be financialized and priced beyond reach. You can't budget your way out of structural inequality. You can't hustle your way out of wage stagnation. You can't work hard enough to overcome a system that's fundamentally rigged against labor and in favor of capital. This doesn't mean individual action is meaningless. It means individual action alone is insufficient. The same structural forces that built the strong middle class of the mid-20th century, collective action, political mobilization, regulatory frameworks, redistributive policies, are what's needed now. The first step is seeing the problem clearly, not as personal failure, but as structural reality. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once enough people see it, the silence breaks. The middle class is collapsing, but collapses can be prevented, halted, even reversed, if we stop treating structural problems as personal failures and start building the systems that make middle-class life possible again. The question isn't whether you're working hard enough. The question is, what kind of economy do we want to build, and who do we want it to serve?